Not really, no. I hope not. I hope not. For me, Interstellar is about an inevitable progression in man's evolution. The idea that one day we're going to have to face the issue of what is our relationship with the planet, what is our relationship, what is our place in the wider universe. And Interstellar follows a group of astronauts who are engaged in that next step, that moving beyond the Earth and out into the universe. It's very much a father-daughter relationship story. It's very much about the connections we have as human beings. There's an emotional tale at the heart of it. And we found consistently that the further we journeyed out into the universe, the more the focus was specifically on love, emotional connections between the characters. And I found that to be a fascinating contrast to play with as a filmmaker. Definitely, as far as Interstellar goes, I mean, absolutely. I think that the very beginning of the film, the world in which they're living, is one in which all kinds of things have gone wrong. It could be portrayed as a dystopian, world, but it's somehow it's not, because the people living in it, and I believe this is realistic, they have risen to the challenge of adapting, and they're making the best of the situation they're in. And I think human beings do that in ways that are absolutely remarkable all across the world all the time. There are a lot of influences on the film, and I think I've been very vocal about 2001 and what an inspiration that was to me. So that's clearly there in the film. But there are plenty of other things, and a lot of them are to do with Americana. A lot of them to do with the right stuff. I mean, the great Philip Kaufman film, and the figure of the pilot at the heart of that. I mean, Chuck Yeager, as portrayed by Sam Shepard in The Right Stuff, he's also something of the cowboy. They make it very literal in that film. He's on a horse looking at the X1. We don't go quite that far, but the farming imagery, the idea of the bucolic landscape, perhaps the idea that it's not a post-apocalyptic future, it's not dystopian in that way. It actually harkens back to the iconography of the Western, of the past in America, the great American iconography of, the farmhouse and the heroic figure standing outside it. It's very, very important to the optimism of the film, because there's an optimistic spirit to that. And so there are a lot of influences on the film. Not all of them American. I mean, you could talk about Tarkovsky. His film Mirror, was one that my DP suggested I take a look at in relation to this film. And indeed, for the elements and the use of elements, whether it's, in this case, it's sort of wind and dust and water and fire and all these things. So there are a lot of influences on the film. To be perfectly honest, one of the fascinating things about working in Hollywood in the studio system is that one of the first things you find out is how much these guys know about movies, and they love movies, and they have a very broad frame of reference. I mean, I would talk about, von Stroheim's Greed, which is a huge influence on the film, and they know what I'm talking about. They get worried if you can't then ground it and say, okay, all these films you mentioned were huge failures, whatever. I mean, 2001 wasn't, but a lot of our reference points cinematically are films that didn't necessarily succeed with an audience, or weren't intended to succeed with an audience. But it's interesting to discuss them as reference points, as long as you can then articulate how you intend to make that accessible to a mainstream audience. Well, I'm the audience, you're the audience. I mean, the thing I resist passionately is any sort of discussion of the audience as them, as if, there's those of us who will understand the complexity of something, and then there are the people out there who won't get it. I don't agree with that at all. We're all the audience, and we understand what we expect from a particular genre, and I like to try and give the audience the richest sort of meal possible, the kind of what I think is the most dense version of that, but it's within the context of a grand scale entertainment. I mean, I'm asked a lot about different themes in Interstellar, but the truth is, first and foremost, it's about the entertainment. It's about the thrill ride, the experience you go through, and the emotional ride. And I've always given the audience a lot of credit for wanting to be challenged, wanting to see more interesting films and all the rest, and I think that's important. Well, for me, that was always the heart of the story. When I first came to the project, my brother's drafts, Murph was a boy. And I changed it to a girl, partly because my eldest child is a girl, like you. And, you know, she's also 12, actually. And so, for me, that was a very strong reference point. And I wanted to make that as truthful and as real as I could, the way I really feel it. And Matthew also has children, and we talked a lot about being fathers and what that means to us. And he developed an incredible relationship with Mackenzie Foy, who plays his daughter in the film, plays the youngest version of his daughter in the film, I should say. And their scenes together were really very, very heartbreaking. I mean, for me, the biggest technical challenge was figuring out how to cover the scenes extensively enough to be able to edit them without tiring them out, without making them do it too many times, because particularly for Mackenzie, I think it was a very emotional thing that she was having to do. And, you know, there were a lot of tears wiped away quietly on set, you know, as they were shooting. Well, it's interesting when people ask about science, because they will use words like truth or fiction, or, you know, and that's not really relevant. The science is a rule set, and every film has a rule set. So the film is certainly consistent with the rules it sets for itself, and they are based on real-world science. But a lot of that is speculation. A lot of what Kip Thorne does is at the absolute cutting edge of thought experiments, of ideas, of what might be possible. And so it's not really a question of sort of saying true or false, you know, what's fact, what's fiction. It's really about a rule set and saying this is what we believe would happen in these situations. And we tried to be as faithful to that as we could. And then there are areas of the film that are, you know, very speculative, of course. And that's part of the fun of fiction. And I think Kip actually had a bit of a thrill, you know, getting to be involved in that kind of experiment, really, of that kind of narrative experiment, like approaching these ideas from a story point of view and see what arises. Particularly in the case of a great movie star like Matthew McConaughey or Anne Hathaway or Jessica Chastain, you know, these guys, what they provide you with is an emotional guide for the audience. And so Matthew in particular, I put on him the task of being the everyman, of being the guide for the audience through this stuff. And we felt all along that whilst we were dealing with complex scientific subjects, as long as the emotional story of the film is clear to people, they will get what they need to in terms of clarity. And that's where the actors can really, really help you. And it's not just about them being willing to, you know, spout off exposition and explain things, because great actors won't do that. They'll need to feel the truth of something. But once they understand it, once they really grasp it, or don't understand it, and ask the question in the scene, that's very, very helpful for the audience. It relaxes the audience a bit. Like if there's something that Cooper, you know, Matthew's character, there are things he doesn't understand in the film. And once he explains he doesn't understand them, I think the audience relaxes a bit and says, no, there's not, you know, this isn't a scientific lecture. There's not going to be a test at the end. This is a ride. This is a thrill ride, and you have to go on this emotional journey with the character.